Hey guys, Mr. Happy here, and today we're going to be covering the Crusader. We're going to be covering all their abilities, all of their runes for each ability, and just general playstyles that I think that would definitely suit a Crusader. And if these are your playstyles, well, then you're in luck because they will become available to you. Now, keep in mind that everything you see here is on a very, very early version of the beta, and that all of this, all the runes, abilities, numbers are all subject to change. Now, this is going to be a pretty long video, so I think we should just go right into everything. So before I even go any further, in case you're wondering what the resource management for a Crusader is called, it's called Wrath. It operates very, very similarly to Spirit, and I would go so much to say is it's a carbon copy of the Spirit. Although a monk tends to generate Spirit a lot faster if you have a really strong build. Not to say the Crusader couldn't, but just my feel from the two different classes that monk's Spirit is definitely faster regenning than the Wrath is. But we'll see about that after we check all the other abilities from monk and the new things. We'll see. So let's run through their abilities. I'm going to start with their primary abilities. These are their Wrath generators. The first one is Punish. Strikes your enemies and gain hardened senses, increasing how well you block. These are the numbers. I'm going to show them, but I'm not really going to read them, or we're going to be here all day. Now we have 5 runes, of course. You have the no rune, and then you have when you block, you explode with Fury, dealing fire damage only when you have hardened senses up, which is the buff you get from Punish. Celerity is when you block, you gain some additional attack speed for 3 seconds. Punish is when you block with hardened senses, your life per second is increased by, in this case, 3,200, so your life regeneration is increased. Retaliate, when you block, your attacker takes 70% weapon damage. That's going to be really good for some block builds. All of these, this is probably going to be mandatory for block builds. And Punish, when you block, your critical hit chance will be increased by 15%, and it will be removed after your next attack, so it's very sharpshootery. After you attack next, the critical hit chance will reset. Otherwise, you'd have perma 15% block chance, because hardened senses does increase your chance to block by a total of 50%. In case you're wondering what the ability looks like, it's very simple. It's like pretty much most basic attacks, and it's your first attack you get at level 1, so it doesn't look all that fancy. Next we have Slash. Now, this is another primary, so ignites the air in front of you, dealing 140% weapon damage as fire. In case you're wondering, it is a small amount of area in front of you, which you'll pretty much be able to figure out from these runes very quickly. So Electrify, the Slash becomes pure lightning and has a chance to stun enemies, which is very, very useful for stun builds. Zeal, for every enemy hit, your attack speed is increased for 3 seconds, and it can stack up to 5 times. It's very, very useful, especially for clearing out giant packs of enemies that are really grouped up. You get that stack really, really quickly. Crush, you have a 5% chance of dealing a crushing blow. Now, crushing blows are new to Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls, and they're basically just really hard hits. If you've played World of Warcraft, you know what a crushing blow is. So it's almost like a critical hit, but not exactly. I'll explain it in a different video. It's an entirely different video if I were to explain it right here anyway. Carve. Carve's a large area in front of you, increasing the number of enemies hit, so it just increases the amount of enemies that you'll hit with Slash, not that big of a deal. And Guard, your armor is increased by 5% for every enemy hit, stacks up to 5 times. Very useful for those very, very high, tanky builds. So then for Slash, let's actually just show what it looks like real quick. There you go. As you can see, it's a little bit of like a lightning cloud in front of me. Let me move out of the gate. There you go. A little bit of a lightning cloud. It does have that kind of area of effect as well. Now next we have Smite. Now smites enemies 15 yards away with Holy Chain. So this is a ranged attack. Deals holy damage. The chains break off and strike at 3 enemies, each dealing 85%. So it's almost like a very good AoE primary. It definitely does by itself, and it's a ranged AoE primary at that. So you can do a ranged build with Smite, although you have more of a mid-range as opposed to a long range. So this is for more of your mid-ranged AoE sort of build. And let's go over the runes. Shatter. The holy chains explode, dealing weapon damage as holy to enemies within 3 yards. So each chain explodes, and it just does some additional damage. Nothing too fancy. Enemies hit by the chains have a 20% chance to be rooted in place, so this, I guess, controls enemies more often. This allows for more of a kitey build, but it's a pretty low percent chance to be rooted, so not so sure how much of a fan I am of that. This increases the range to 30 yards, which definitely gives you a bigger ranged utility on Smite. So this actually brings you from a mid to a sort of mid to long range build, which is very, very good. Reaping, your life per second is increased for every enemy hit by the chains for 2 seconds, stacks up to 4 times. This is for more of your tanky ranged build, which is kind of strange, but there are other abilities that you can definitely use in place of this. So let's definitely just check out the rest of the abilities before we judge it. Shared fate, the chains bind those they hit, causing them to share one another's fate. Damage done to any bound enemy is also dealt to all other bound enemies. So very interesting. This seems to be just shared damage across everyone that gets hit by it. I'm not so much a big a fan of the wording of this rune, but I'm sure it works out very well. And now let's show off just what Smite looks like. Now, as you can see, you can't really see it right here, so I'm gonna go attack something. As you can see, I'm smiting things from far away. It's very, very low range, just because it's only the current rank. I only have the 15 yards, which isn't very much at all, but you can upgrade it to 30 yards, which is far more ranged. However, if you're looking for a ranged build, Justice is a very good primary for that. It just hurls a hammer at the enemies. Here are the numbers, so you can see there's 120% weapon damage. Let's look at the runes for that real quick. Burst is the first one. The hammer is charged with lightning and explodes on impact, dealing lightning damage to all enemies within 10 yards. Enemies caught in the explosion have a chance to be stunned, so a ranged stunned build could be very interesting with this. Crack. When the hammer hits an enemy, there's an 80% chance it will crack into 2 smaller hammers, which will fly out and deal holy damage. It's pretty good. Again, this has sort of an AoE component to it, a lot of wave clearing. This would probably be really good for clearing out normal and hard difficulties. Hammer of Pursuit. The hammer will now seek out the target and deal 155% weapon damage. Keep in mind that is more than the base auto attack, so if you're just looking for a primary that does some higher damage, this is probably the one for you. Sword of Justice turns it into a sword, and whenever it hits an enemy, your movement speed is increased by 2% for 3 seconds, stacks up to 5 times. So if you're going for a highly mobile, kitey build, this would probably be a really good primary for you. And Holy Bolt throws a bolt of holy power, healing you and your allies for life whenever the bolt hits an enemy. Kind of similar to some of the other runes that we've seen on the other abilities. I wasn't a huge fan of just how many abilities seemed kind of similar to each other with the primaries, but those are all of those. And now let's just throw a hammer real quick. I'll throw a Sword of Justice, as a matter of fact. It turns it into a sword, a spinning sword. Normally it looks more like this. This is what it actually looks like. As you can see, there's the hammer. It's like a Thor hammer almost. And yeah, so those are the primaries. Those are your wrath generators. Now let's look into the secondary, which are your wrath spenders. You know, that's how it is with pretty much every class in the game. You know, your primary generates resources, and then your secondary uses resources. So first you have Shield Bash. It's got a cost of 30 wrath. I think almost everything here has a cost of about 30 wrath, so it goes pretty quickly. Charging your enemies, bashing him and all nearby foes with your shield deals some damage based on your weapon damage and some based on your block amount as holy damage. So you want to really stack block amount if you're going to be using Shield Bash, because it really, really pumps up the damage. Next you have Shattered Shield. This is the first rune. The shield shatters into other smaller fragments, hitting more enemies. The extra enemies take 450% weapon damage and 140% of your block shield amount. So very similar. It's just one shield hits and then breaks off into 2 smaller shields. So has some more AoE component to it, but the range is pretty short. You'll see that in a little bit. One-on-one, the targeted monster is rooted in place for 3 seconds. All other monsters hit are knocked back. So this sort of initiates a duel, since it locks an enemy in place. Very good for locking down enemies. Works very, very well. Shield Cross. Additional shields erupt from you in a cross formation. Enemies hit by any of the additional shields will take weapon damage and block them out. So this sort of turns you into an AoE machine. It just it pulses out in 4 directions around you, as opposed to just the one going forward. It's not all that great, to be honest, but I'm not going to say don't use it. It's just do some work, in my opinion. Foes who are killed explode, dealing weapon damage to enemies behind them and knocking those enemies back. This does a lot of damage. I feel like it doesn't do as much damage as the base one, but the enemies exploding is definitely a big deal, since it does damage on top of the initial effect. It's definitely a really, really strong rune for Shield Bash. And Pound. Shield Bash will now deal 700% weapon damage and 150% shield block amount as holy. The range is reduced, however, so it gets a smaller range, but it deals significantly more damage. It actually works out very, very well. So let's show Shield Bash real quick. I'm just going to show Shattered Shield. I guess I'll just do that. Let's see here. So we have an enemy right here. So what happens when you use it actually is you sort of charge forward like this, and it does that. So I might as well just kill these guys since, there we go. Alright, now that that's done, now we're going to move on to the next secondary, Sweep Attack. There are so many abilities we're going to have to go through, guys. Sweep Attack sweeps a mystical flail through enemies up to 18 yards, dealing weapon damage. You know how it works with secondaries. Only costs 20 wrath, so it's a pretty good spamming ability. Next you have Blazing Sweep. Enemies hit by the attack will catch fire, so it does some additional fire damage over time, over a very short time, so it actually does a pretty high amount of damage. Enemies hit by the sweep attack have a chance to be tripped, stunning them for 5 seconds. It's a very long stun. It's a very low chance to proc, but if you stack enough attack speed, I'm sure you could perma-stun something with that. Holy Shock, for every enemy hit, you will heal. So again, for a very tanky build, Sweep Attack is very good. You can use this rune, and again, a lot like a lot of the other abilities, it will heal you on hit. Gathering Sweep increases the range of the arc to 28 yards, but on all enemies caught in the arc are pulled into you. This is just really good for gathering up enemies, as it is called Gathering Sweep. Next we have Frozen Sweep, however. The flail becomes frozen. Enemies hit by it have a 20% chance to be chilled. For 3 seconds, these chilled enemies take more damage. So this is more of a supporty kind of locking them down. Very much, very, very good for team play. If you're somebody who has anything with freeze on hit or anything like that, this comes in very handy. Let's actually show Gathering a Sweep, just so you can see what the Sweep Attack looks like. As you can see, Gathering Sweep looks very, very cool. I really like the look of this. Hey, yellow. And I have no place to put it, so it doesn't matter. So let me just sweep these guys real quick. As you can see, it pulled that guy in. That was just showing off the one rune. If I had to show off every rune, we'd pretty much be here all day. Next, we have Blessed Hammer. Now, I already know some of you Diablo 2 players are like, there it is. There's the Hammerdin. Well, the Crusader, whatever you want to call them, the Hammer. I don't know. Not going to come up with any clever names this time. Summon a Blessed Hammer that spins around you, dealing 245% weapon damage as holy to any enemy it hits. Maybe I should just show off the ability now so you can actually just see what it looks like now. If I can actually hit the accept button instead of being lazy. As you can see, it just does the hammers. It just throws them all around. They just spin around. If I move, the hammers are stationary to where I actually casted them, as opposed to where I'm moving. But we have some runes to go over, so let's do that. Burning Wrath. The hammer is engulfed in fire and has a chance to scorch the ground over which it passes. Enemies who pass through the scorched ground take weapon damage. Very, very good area control on this. Lots of AoE damage, and it's one of the best runes in the game, in my opinion, for a Crusader. Minus one that's bugged right now, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Thunderstruck, the hammers are charged with lightning, which occasionally arc between you and the hammer as it spirals through the air. This one's one of the flashiest looking ones. I might show you guys this one later. Limitless. When the hammers hit an enemy, there is a 50% chance that a new hammer will be created at the location the monster was hit. Basically, infinite hammers. That's why it's called Limitless. The chance is really, really high on this one, so you can get a ton of hammers flying around the screen. Remember that they have that sort of weird arc, though, so they're not always reliable damage. Icebound Hammer. The hammers are made of ice, chilling enemies they pass through and have a chance to explode on impact, freezing enemies for 2 seconds. This is great for locking down enemies. The freeze is extremely, extremely consistent. Even though it's only a 10% chance, it feels way higher when you use it, trust me. And Dominion, the hammers will now orbit you as you move. As you saw when I did it the first time, they weren't following me. This actually makes them follow me. So it actually means you can use a hammer and start running through an enemy. I sort of wish they didn't arc outwards when you use this. I wish they sort of stayed around you so you could keep them in your vicinity and just use them to deal damage in an area around you. Maybe limit the amount of hammers you can spawn doing that, but I would like to see some changes to this rune. It sounds really good, but unfortunately in practice it just doesn't even compare to the other runes. So next we have Blessed Shield. Before I go over the runes, I'll show it off real quick. You just throw a shield real quick. It actually looks really cool. And if you hit multiple enemies, it actually bounces between them. As you can see, again, people who have played World of Warcraft are very familiar with the idea of a bouncing shield. So now that we've done that, let's go over the runes. As you can see, it hurls a Celestial Shield, only costs 20 Wrath, and it will ricochet between 3 nearby enemies. Now, the runes are Staggering Shield. The shield becomes charged with lightning and has a chance to stun. This is a very common theme that we're running across. Each enemy hit reduces the chance to stun by 5%, so if it keeps bouncing, the other enemies have less and less chance of actually being stunned, but any of the enemies can be stunned since it can only bounce between 3 targets. The shield erupts in flames. This is Combust. The shield erupts in flames and it has a chance to explode on impact, dealing fire damage to all enemies. This means when it explodes on impact, it doesn't actually bounce, I believe. I haven't actually tested this one yet, but it just does some AoE damage as fire, which is actually pretty good, depending on where you are, how dense the packs are that you're clearing out. Alright, Divine Aegis. When the shield hits an enemy, your armor is increased and your life regeneration is increased for 4 seconds. This works extremely well for extremely tanky builds. Even though 5% seems kind of low, you can keep this buff up pretty much all the time, and it works out very, very well. Shattering Throw. When the shield hits an enemy, it splits into 3 small fragments which bounce between enemies nearby. So keep in mind the initial, so it bounces into 3 fragments, and those bounce between targets as well. So you can get a ton of crazy shield bouncing with this ability, especially with certain builds with certain legendaries. And Piercing Shield. The shield no longer bounces but pierces through enemies and knocks them aside. So it becomes a skill shot that knocks enemies aside. And it just does the base damage that Blessed Shield does with the chance to knock them aside. It's alright. It works with some builds, but I'm not a big fan of this one. And Fist of the Heaven, this is one of the best abilities that you get as a Crusader, in my opinion. I accidentally popped one of my other abilities right there. So it just summons a fist from the sky that just does that. It has a pretty high wrath cost, so you're definitely going to need some wrath generation for this one. And as you can see, it shoots out those bolts, which I will read right here. Calls forth a pillar of lightning from the heavens that explode, dealing weapon damage as lightning damage, not holy. The explosion creates 6 pierce charges that arc outward, each dealing a huge amount of weapon damage from who they pass. Yes, they are piercing charged bolts, so they do keep traveling after they hit a single target. Divine Well. The holy bolts crackle with holy lightning and zap enemies within 20 yards, dealing weapon damage as holy. So now this makes the little bolts become holy, and it works out pretty well. Heaven's Tempest summons a lightning storm that covers an 8-yard radius for 3 seconds, and it deals weapon damage per second to enemies who pass underneath it. So it summons a little cloud, basically. Fissure creates a fissure of lightning energy that deals weapon damage to nearby monsters. If there's another fissure nearby, power lightning will arc between them. It doesn't say how much damage the power lightning does. I'm assuming it does the 530% weapon damage as well. And this is one of my favorite runes, again, in the entire game. It works out extremely well. It does a ton of damage compared to most of the other Fist of Heaven runes, so I'm assuming a lot of people are going to be using this one. Reverberation. The bolt detonates with a shockwave on impact, causing all enemies hit to be thrown away from the blast and slowed by 60% for 3 seconds. This is real. This you can knock around some enemies pretty hard with this and clear out a lot of space. So depending on what kind of build you're going for, that could be extremely useful. And Retribution hurls a fist of fire. This is I call this the Hadouken one. It's called Retribution. I call it Hadouken. I'm actually going to show this one. Hurls a fist of fire and lightning, which pierces through your enemies, dealing weapon damage as lightning, and exploding at your target, dealing weapon damage as lightning within 8 yards. The explosion creates 6 pierce charges, so that's pretty much the same. I'm going to show you guys this one real quick, just so you understand what it looks like. It also gives it a wrath, not it gives it a wrath cost, but it's just a Hadouken. That's what it is. You just turn into a Hadoukening Crusader, so if you're a big fan of Hadoukens, you can have a lot of fun with that one. And those are all your primaries and your secondaries. Now we're going to go over the action bar skills. Now you have Conviction, Utility, Laws, and Conviction again. So you have 2 Conviction slots. Let's go over the first Conviction slot, which gives you 4 abilities, one of which is extremely overpowered, but we'll get into that a little bit. Falling Sword, launch yourself into the heavens and come crashing down on your enemies. So this is one that they've showed off a lot in the trailers and everything. So when you use it, it just does this. And it's extremely satisfying to use, especially with some of the runes that we're going to be going over. I have to wait for the cooldown now, so I probably should... If I have to wait for a cooldown on an ability, I should probably wait to show it till a little bit later. Luckily, we don't have to wait for that entirely. Never mind, we do, because we can't look at the runes. Shows just how prepared I was for this video. I've now burned up 30 seconds of talking. Hopefully you could stand that. So... Superheated is the first one. The ground you fall on becomes superheated, dealing weapon damage as fire per second to all enemies who pass over it. Just basically creates a giant area of fire. Part the clouds. You build a storm of lightning as you fall, which covers the area you land on for 5 seconds. Lightning strikes random enemies under the cloud, dealing weapon damage as lightning and stunning them. Again, really working hard on that stun build. So many of your abilities have a stun attached to them that you could really just perma-stun everything with the right build. You land with such force that 3 avatars of order are summoned forth to fight by your side for 5 seconds. Each avatar will deal 100% of your weapon damage as physical. So basically it just summons a bunch of adds that help fight with you. It's alright, it's not the greatest of runes, it's not so satisfying to use, but it has its uses. Falling Sword reduces the cooldown by 1 second for each enemy hit. Now, very interesting thing about that. I went to use this, and it almost seemed like it was knocking enemies back. It doesn't say that it knocks enemies back, and neither does This one, just as it comes crashing down, and deals damage, but I almost felt like this was knocking enemies back, which was extremely, extremely strange. It made it a lot more frustrating to use, especially considering it doesn't say that it does that, but this can really work well with cooldown reduction for perma-falling swords. You do a ton of damage with that, but we'll talk about that another time. Flurry, Falling Sword. This is a Flurry of Swords is summoned at the impact location. They've shown this one in some of the trailers for Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls. Damage to monsters caught in the flurry and hurling monsters around and incapacitating them for 5 seconds. So it just summons a bunch of swords. If you've watched any of the trailers, you've seen this one before. Now, next we have Akarat's Champion. I accidentally used this one before, and I'm not going to show you till after I go over all of the runes. It's got a 2-minute cooldown, so it's one of those pretty long cooldowns, and it's a lot like Wrath of the Berserker, but it has it doesn't have nearly the same effect as Wrath of the Berserker, unfortunately. So basically, explode with the power of your order, gaining 100% additional Wrath generation and 25% attack speed for 20 seconds. And if you take fatal damage while Akarat's Champion is available, you will be returned to full health. So you can use it to stay alive, which is extremely, extremely useful, but it only works once. So while it's active, it can only regenerate you back to full health once. So it definitely raises your effective HP pool by quite a lot, or you can use it if you were going to die. But let's go over the runes now. Firestarter. Damage dealt while in this form also inflicts 25% weapon damage as fire, just some additional damage on top of your other damages. Embodiment of Power. Enemies within 7 yards of you will occasionally become frozen in fear for 3 seconds. So just occasionally freezes enemies in fear. So they get feared, but they don't run around, basically. Anytime you deal damage, there is a 50% chance you will reduce the cooldown of all of your other skills by 1 second. This does not affect this ability itself, so you can't have a perma Akarat's Champion. We'll get into the Barbarian, the Wrath of Berserker, how that compares a little bit later. Prophet, gain 150% additional armor, so it makes you a pretty beefy tank with a lot of Wrath regeneration, so you can pretty much become unkillable with this thing, although it kind of makes the passive where you take fatal damage a little bit less needed, but, you know, who can really complain about surviving for longer, right? And the final one is Hasteful. While in this form, your movement speed is increased, extremely, extremely useful for getting around quickly. Remember, though, that it does have a 2-minute cooldown, so just popping it for the movement speed is not really recommended. It's just an added bonus for that 20 seconds. So this is what Akarat's Champion looks like. I'm actually going to show you the Embodiment of Power one. It doesn't really matter, but it just makes you bigger, really. And the aura around you sort of changes with each different one that you get. So that's all Akarat's Champion really looks like. I mean, my Wrath regeneration is higher, my attack speed is higher. It's really hard to see that because I don't have a lot of attack speed, but when it wears off, you'll see that. I throw my hammer significantly slower when Akarat's Champion isn't up. There it goes. Now you can sort of see the difference in attack speed that it was making, which is a pretty big deal. So in order to keep looking at convictions, I'm going to head over to Utility, and I'm going to look at Heaven's Fury next. So Heaven's Fury, I'm going to say a few things about it, but this ability is currently bugged. Not the ability itself, but something else about it is bugged. I'll go over that when we get to the rune. Heaven's Fury calls down a furious ray of holy power that deals a ton of weapon damage per second, over 6 seconds to all enemies caught within it. This by itself already does a ton of damage. Now, it's 1500% over 6 seconds, which is working as intended, I believe. It's this rune, Blessed Ground, that's not working as intended. So the ground touched by the ray becomes blessed, scorching it and dealing huge weapon damage over 5 seconds to any enemies who walk through it. Any of you who played Diablo 3, the initial one, and you know the Trail of Cinders bug, where it was dealing damage per second instead of over 5 seconds, it's the same thing. So basically, it's dealing that high amount of weapon damage every second. Instead of dealing 250% weapon damage every second, it's dealing the entire amount every second. So it's broken quite a bit, but I'm sure that'll get fixed. The rune itself is still extremely powerful, even if you fix it. Now, Heaven's Fury Ascendancy, the Ray of Holy Power grows to encompass 12 yards and deals a higher amount of holy damage over the 6 seconds. So this one does a lot. This one's really, really hard hitting. Split Fury, the ray splits into 3 smaller beams, each dealing a total weapon damage as holy damage over 6 seconds. Each one deals its own set of damage. Extremely powerful and extremely good for clearing out a large amount of packs. Thou shalt not pass. Ground touched by the ray pulses with holy power, stopping enemies who try to pass over it. So this creates almost like a safe zone. It's kind of weird. There's no real way to control Heaven's Fury, so you can't use it to protect yourself. But I can imagine if you're fighting one thing and you don't want something else to fight you, or you want to kite it around, you can use Heaven's Fury to do that. Now, Fires of Heaven, the ray is focused on your shield in a pulse that is deflected in a tightly focused beam across the battlefield, dealing damage. The cooldown is removed, however, it now costs 40 wrath, so it basically changes how it works entirely. Instead, you just shoot it off of your shield, and it doesn't summon the cool laser from the sky. However, I know everybody wants to see the cool laser from the sky, so I'm going to show you the cool laser from the sky. I'm going to show you the split fury version. Basically, these lasers just hurt stuff. They track enemies, but when there's nothing to track, they just kind of move around at random, almost as if they have some sort of AI programmed into them. And that's all there really is to Heaven's Fury. It has a pretty short cooldown too, so you can use it pretty often. It's really, really cool. And the final ability, and this ability you get at 61, is Bombardment. Calls in assault from afar, raining spheres of burning pitch and stone onto enemies around you, dealing weapon damage to enemies within the impact zone. The bombardment continues on randomly targeted monsters nearby for the next 5 seconds. It's a very, very... It's in progress. It's being worked out how it balances out, because it has a 1 minute cooldown, and it doesn't really feel even as powerful as some of the non-bugged Heaven's Fury abilities. So, Bombardment. In place of the burning spheres, barrels of sticky tar are hurled that cover the area, slowing monsters to walk through them. It turns into more of a utility move. I'm not so much a huge fan of that. Annihilate. Each impact has a 100% chance to deal a crushing blow, so crushing blows do a ton of damage. And I'm going to be doing a video about the new stats and the new abilities in the future, so you'll know what a crushing blow means when I do that video if you don't already. Minefield. Each impact scatters 2 mines onto the battlefield, which explode when enemies walk near them, dealing weapon damage to everything within 10 yards. So it's basically just more damage. It summons mines that explode when enemies walk near them. So it summons a bunch of proximity mines on top of the damage Bombardment was doing already. Impactful Bombardment. A single, much larger ball of explosion is hurled at the targeted location, dealing a massive amount of damage to everything within a certain range. So this just summons one giant meteor, nothing over time, everything is up front, does a ton of damage. May be pretty useful. I haven't tested it out yet, but we'll see in the future when I'm working on some builds. Targeted. The bombardment will no longer randomly find targets. It will instead continue to fall on your initial target. So this basically is for killing elites. As long as you target an elite, it will just rain death upon only that target. Of course, it deals the damage in the area, but that target will become the center of what you are looking at to deal damage. And I'm going to show it to you real quick. I'm going to show you what the normal one looks like, just the normal one, just because all of these kind of rapidly change the way it looks, and I just want you to see what it looks like in its natural form. This is what it looks like. So it summons the first one, and then it just keeps summoning them for like 5 seconds. It has no targets, so it's just all going to the same location. It doesn't really look that exciting. I'd say that the one that summons the giant one is the most exciting looking one. And that's it for those. So let's move on to the next set of abilities, which is your utility. Actually, you know what? Let's go over defense next. Well, how about you say? Let's go over defensive next, because there's actually quite a few defensive abilities here that are pretty cool. So the first one we're going to look at is Shield Glare. Pretty short cooldown of only 12 seconds. Light erupts from his shield, blinding all enemies up to 30 yards in front of you for 4 seconds. It's like a conal version of the monk move that does the blinding attack. I can't remember its name right now, but it's really, really good. So let's look at the runes real quick. Divine Verdict. Blinded enemies take more damage from all sources for the 4 seconds. Extremely useful for a utility. Enemies caught in the glare have the 50% chance to be charmed and fight for you for 8 seconds. Some of these are very, very similar to the runes that Monk has. In fact, I think so far these are carbon copies. Zealot's Glare. Gain 12 Wrath for every enemy blinded. Very good for Wrath regeneration. You hit a group of mobs, you're back at full Wrath. One of my favorite abilities to use. Emblazoned Shield. Enemies with health lower than 25% have a chance to explode when blinded. So this one's a damage-dealing version of it that you have to sort of use as enemies get lower. It's sort of an execute Shield Glare, which is kind of weird. I haven't tested it out if it works really well yet, but if you're looking for something that deals that will always deal damage and you won't have to save, I don't know that this is that useful for you. And Subdue. Enemies hit by the glare will be slowed by 80% for 10 seconds. So for the 4 seconds they're blinded, they're slowed, and then for 6 seconds afterwards. Remember, the cooldown's only 12 seconds, so you can pretty much perma-slow something with enough cooldown reduction if you wanted to go for sort of a kitey build with the Shield Glare attack. So I'm going to show you what it looks like real quick. I'm just going to equip Divine Verdict for it. This is what it looks like. Very short cooldown. That's pretty cool, and that is the range of it, and it works extremely well, so give that out a try when you get the chance to try Crusader for yourself. This has a really short cooldown, so let's move on to Iron Skin. Iron Skin, a lot of you are going to be familiar with. It's very much like the Barbarian ability that reduces damage, ignore pain. However, so your skin turns into iron, absorbing 50% of all incoming damage for 4 seconds, so it's a defensive cooldown on a 30-second cooldown. Only lasts 4 seconds, so it's not too overpowered. The rune's Reflective Skin deals 50% of damage absorbed while Iron Skin is active back at attackers, so it reflects damage. Again, a lot like one of the Ignore Pain runes. A lot of these seem very similar to the Ignore Pain runes, but there's only so much you can do with a skill like this. Steel Skin increases the duration to 7 seconds, again for really tanky people who don't need to do any extra damage and just want to survive. This works extremely well with some of your other abilities. Explosive Skin, when Iron Skin expires, the metal explodes, dealing weapon damage to enemies within 12 yards. This is extremely powerful for defensive cooldown. It's definitely some added damage that some people could definitely find some use for when they have enough gear. Your Metal Skin is electrified, dealing weapon damage as lightning per second to enemies within 8 yards. So it deals 300% weapon damage every second for the 4 seconds that it lasts to any enemies near you. It's extremely powerful, and it's more consistent than Explosive Skin since the damage is dealt up front. It can definitely help kill off some enemies a lot quicker. And Flash, while active, your movement speed is increased by 60% and you can move through enemies unimpeded, so it doubles the defensive cooldown use. It allows you to pass through enemies in case you need to use it as an escape, and it also makes you more durable while you are doing it, and it makes you faster, so it's extremely useful. I'm in fact going to show you that version of Iron Skin right now. Here you go. So that's my normal movement speed. You pop Iron Skin. That's what it looks like now. As you can see, my armor, I become, clad in armor, and all your armor completely changes, which looks really cool. It's something that I didn't expect when I first used it, but it's a nice touch on it to see all of your armor just be changed in general. It just looks really cool. I'm going to wait for the 30-second cooldown to finish, and then we're going to move on to the next defensive ability. Already clocking in at 31 minutes here, so I kind of want to roll through these a little bit quicker. Consecration, consecrate the ground 20 yards around you for 10 seconds. You and your allies heal for life per second while standing on the consecrated ground. The first rune is increase the radius of the consecrated ground to 24 yards, self-explanatory. Frozen ground, the consecrated ground becomes frozen. Enemies that walk into the frozen ground have their movement speed reduced by 60%, have a 40% chance to be frozen for 2 seconds. Again, very self-explanatory for freeze builds. Aegis Purgatory, the edge of the consecrated ground is surrounded by a sacred shield preventing enemies from moving through it. You can hide inside of it, you can hide outside of it. It works really well for ranged builds. Shattered Ground, enemies standing on the consecrated ground will take 115% weapon damage as fire per second. So just makes consecrated ground deal some damage, so it'll heal you and damage them. Works good for me. Fearful, enemies standing on the consecrated ground have a 100% chance to be feared for 3 seconds, so they step in it, they get feared. Pretty much self-explanatory. I'm going to show you the basic consecration. I'm just not going to equip any runes for this. So this is what consecration looks like, and then that is the general range of it, and then any of the different runes create, the bubble or the fire damage on the ground or things like that. So now that that's done with, it's still on the ground. It lasts for a pretty long time. Again, it lasts for 10 seconds. And let's move on to the next defensive ability, the last one, which is Judgment. Not a huge fan of this one, but I'm sure some people have some good uses for it. So, Judgment. Sorry, it's got a 20-second cooldown. Pass Judgment on all enemies within 20 yards of the targeted location, rooting them in place for 7 seconds. So, it's for crowd control. That's just what it is, and it's got a pretty short cooldown. It's got a pretty decent range, so it's all right for certain builds. Just not something I'm a fan of. The first rune is Penitence. For every enemy upon whom you pass Judgment, you heal for life per second for 3 seconds. So it gives you some life per second, which is pretty cool. If you hit like 20 enemies, it's just a ton of healing. Mass Verdict, all enemies that are judged are first drawn into the center of the judged area. Really good for grouping up enemies. This is probably really good for team play, or really good for some other builds with like Fist of the Heaven and things like that. Deliberation increases the duration of the root to 12 seconds, so just roots enemies for longer is all it really does. Resolved, damage dealt to judged monsters have a 10% chance to be a crushing blow. So now that they're judged, when you're dealing damage to them, it increases your chance of dealing crushing blows. Very useful. And conversion, enemies below 25% who are judged have a 20% chance to be converted into an avatar of order who fight by your side for 5 seconds. Each avatar will attack for 100% of your weapon damage. So it's like a charm, but it's like an execute charm kind of way, like you're almost dead, now I'm going to take control of you kind of deal. I am going to show the Mass Verdict one. I'm not going to actually show it on enemies, but I will show it. So this is what Judgment looks like. I'm going to do the judged area over there. That's what it looks like. It just judges them, draws them all to the center, and then roots them in place. So now that that's out of the way, those are all the defensive abilities. Let's move over to the utility. We only have utilities and laws left. So we're actually almost done with this, guys, so don't worry. We're going through this pretty quick. Provoke taunts all nearby enemies and instantly generate an additional 5 wrath for every enemy taunted. Taunted enemies will focus their attention on you for 4 seconds. So it's a provoke, and it works extremely well. Generates 30 wrath, which is amazing, and it generates additional wrath for every enemy taunted. So this is a great wrath regenerator on a 20-second cooldown. And let's look at the runes. Cleanse. For each enemy successfully taunted, you gain additional life on hit for 5 seconds. So another survivability one. Not so big a fan of the name, but let's move on. Flee Fool. Instead of provoking, it causes them to flee in terror for 8 seconds. 8 seconds is a pretty long time, just saying. Too Scared to Run is the next one. Taunted enemies have their attack speed and movement speed reduced for 4 seconds. Extremely useful for just surviving, even as that. It's definitely a more survival-based provoke, especially because there's no sort of defensive thing built into provoke as it is. For 4 seconds after casting Provoke, any damage you deal will also deal 50% weapon damage as lightning, so it just makes it so you deal some additional damage while you have the mobs provoked onto you. And Hit Me. For 4 seconds after casting Provoke, your block chance is increased by 50%. Giant block chance increase, so if you're doing a chance on block build, this would work extremely well as well. So I am just going to show Too Scared to Run. I'm going to go find some enemies for it real quick. I picked this area on purpose. So here's a bunch of enemies. Let's taunt them. See, they're all coming towards me. Taunted. So they're slowed and all that stuff, and normally they would just, you know, run up to me and start hitting me. I'm just going to Hadouken them real quick down, and there you go. So that's Provoke. The next ability we're going to talk about, I'm just going to wait for the 20-second cooldown so I can use the same slot, just so I don't have to go through it all again. Provoke Steed Charge. This is one of my favorite abilities. Mount a celestial horse that allows you to ride through enemies unimpeded for 2 seconds. Only sits on a 15-second cooldown. Makes it so you can get around the map pretty quickly. Ramming Speed. The war horse now deals weapon damage per second and knocks enemies away through which you ride. So it just makes it like it clears the path almost for your horse. Nightmare. The warhorse is consumed with righteous fire, scorching all who walk in its path for 900% weapon damage as fire over 4 seconds. So it leaves sort of a path behind you, very similar to Trail of Cinders for the Vault rune of Demon Hunter. And it does quite a bit of damage. It's over 4 seconds. Again, I'm pretty sure this one's not bugged, unlike Blessed Ground, but let's move on. While riding the warhorse, you will recover 15% of your life. It's over 2 seconds, so you regenerate that life back extremely quickly. Endurance, the increased duration to 4 seconds. If you're looking to get around the map extremely quickly, you will definitely want to use this rune. And Draw and Quarter, bind 5 monsters near you with the chains and drag them as you ride, dealing weapon damage per second. So it just makes a bunch of enemies get latched onto your horse and you drag them with you. So it looks pretty cool. I'm actually just going to show the endurance one just to show you how far you can ride with the endurance one. So I'm going to pop it and start running. Here you go. This is what it looks like when you use it. And that is the approximate distance. Let me kill these guys so I can actually record in peace, since I don't want to have to run all the way back. And that's what Steed Charge looks like. Of course, you have all of the other runes for it that do different things. I just wanted to show the endurance one, how much of a distance you can cover with it. So, next, let's move on to Condemn. Now, this is a short cooldown of only 15 seconds. Builds up a massive explosion, unleashing it after 3 seconds, dealing 1250% weapon damage as wholly to all enemies within 15 yards. So it's just a small, sort of timed explosion that you get around you. Reciprocate. You take 50% damage while the explosion is building, which is then added to the damage of the explosion. So if you're tanking a ton of mobs and you use this, you can deal some insane damage back to them. Just saying. Vacuum. As the explosion charge, it sucks in monsters. The closer it is to exploding, the more monsters it sucks in. So it just makes it so enemies can't really escape your Condemn, which is extremely useful. Eternal Retaliation. For every monster hit by the explosion, the cooldown is reduced by 1 second. With enough CDR, with enough cooldown reduction, you can have a perma Condemn where you just keep hitting this button and you can just keep clearing out waves of enemies near you. I'd like to see that sort of work, although the range is kind of small, so I don't know how rewarding it would be. Shattering Explosion. The damage area is increased to 20 yards, just makes it so it hits more enemies more reliably. And Unleashed. The explosion now goes off instantly. It foregoes the whole charge thing and just goes off instantly, which is extremely good for quickly clearing out packs. But remember, it has a 15-second cooldown, so it's not like you can spam it like this. It's just for some instant gratification. I'm actually going to show the one that has the increased range. Actually, I'm going to show the one that doesn't have increased range, so you know what the increased range looks like. So I'm just going to use Vacuum, going to charge it up. There it goes. It's charging up in that area, sucking everything towards it, and then bam, it explodes. So that's what the base range looks like. The base range is 15 yards, so the other rune only increases it by 5, which isn't a whole lot. And the final utility skill is Phalanx. It summons powerful avatars who charge forward to the targeted destination. Enemies caught in the path of the charge take weapon damage. It's pretty cool, and it costs 30 Wrath. Doesn't have a cooldown, so you can pretty much use it as a Wrath spender if you really want. The summon avatars wield bows and attack enemies as they march, dealing weapon damage, so it just adds some bowmen to your charging attack. Shield charge. The summon avatars charge the target and perform a shield bash, damaging enemies at the location, dealing weapon damage, so it just makes them do a shield bash. Summons a warhorse that charges and knocks back the enemy with a 25% chance to stun them, so stun and knockback, it's really for utility again. Shield bearers, the avatars no longer walk forward, but plant at the summoned location, blocking all enemies from moving through. This can keep you protected for a very short time, especially because it's a Wrath spender. If you want to use 2 Wrath spenders and you have good Wrath regeneration, you can pretty much create an impenetrable shield around yourself. And Bodyguard, instead of sending the avatar out away from you, you summon 2 avatars of order to protect you, who fight by your side for 10 seconds. Each avatar will attack for weapon damage as physical, but it adds a 30-second cooldown to Phalanx, since they can only be summoned once every 30 seconds. So I'm going to show you what the base Phalanx looks like, just so you can see what it looks like and sort of figure out how the runes will work with it. There it goes. It summons them forward, and they just charge forward. If they hit a wall, they stop. So if I were to summon them in this direction, they would actually travel a great deal farther until they hit that wall. They travel pretty far, and it's pretty good. So now we're on the last set of abilities. Now these are laws. These are very similar to mantras that monks have, although they have permanent effects and active effects. So instead of being only passive for like 2 minutes and having to be put up constantly, these laws will last indefinitely and will grant you and the people near you a passive effect. So the first one is Laws of Valor, which when you activate it, it basically increases the effect of the passive. So it gives you and your allies 10% increased attack speed for 5 seconds, while passively it grants you and your allies 5% increased attack speed, as long as it's the law that you have active. Now the runes, Invincible. Empowering the law also increases your life on hit by 10,000. This scale, I don't know how exactly this scales, because this number has been changing for me. It might be based on my total life percentage, but I'm not exactly sure. But it basically just makes you get more life on hit. Frozen in Terror, when you empower the law, you have a chance to stun each enemy within 10 yards for 5 seconds. So every time you empower the law, you have a chance of stunning, and it will stun enemies actually. So I don't know why I said it has a chance. Empowering the law also increases your critical hit damage by 100%. This is a huge damage buff. If you're going for a damage Crusader with a lot of critical hit chance and critical hit damage, this one will increase your damage by a lot. Unstoppable Force. Empowering the law reduces Wrath cost of all skills by 50% for 5 seconds. This can be extremely useful if you find yourself Wrath starved quite often. And Answered Prayer. Empowering the law also has a 20% chance to turn health globes into Nephilim Glory Orbs. If you don't know what a Nephilim Glory Orb, basically it gives your auto attacks a chance to deal an explosion. Every single attack that you do has a chance to grant an explosion. So, yeah, basically while it's active, you have a chance of getting some Nephilim Glory Orbs, which isn't that great of a passive in my opinion, but it's there, so it is what it is. I'm just going to go over all the laws. Since they don't really have different animations, they're kind of like mantras, I'm just going to go over them all right now, and then I'm going to activate one so you can see what it looks like, the active versus the passive. So, Laws of Justice, they all have cooldowns of 30 seconds, as you can see. This one grants, when it's active, grants 350 all res to you and your allies, and passively it grants 140 all res to you and your allies. So, Protect the Innocent, Empowering the Law, also redirects 20% of the damage taken by allies to you, so it makes you take some of everybody's damage. So it redirects damage towards you. Immovable Object, Empowering the Law, also increases the armor for you and your allies by 7,000, so it's a super defensive ability in this case. Not only does it increase your all res by 350, it also increases your armor by 7,000 for the duration. Faith's Armor, Empowering the Law, also surrounds you and your allies with shields of faith that absorb damage, so it absorbs a little bit of damage. It doesn't really absorb that much damage. I think it needs a little bit more tuning. Decaying Strength, while the law is empowered, anytime an enemy attacks you or your allies, the enemy's damage dealt is lowered by 15% up to a maximum of 60%. So if an enemy hits you 4 times while this is active, then their damage will be reduced by 60%. It can be really good for tanking certain enemies. And Bravery, Empowering the Law, grants immunity to control impairing effects to you and your allies for 3 seconds. So it doesn't allow you to be jailed, it doesn't allow you to be knocked back, or I don't know about Wormhole, but it basically just prevents you from being CC'd. And we have Laws of Hope. This one, when you empower it, gives you almost 10,000 life per second, but passively it gives about 1,600 life per second. So it definitely increases your healing by a significant amount. So, Wings of Angels is the first one. This one gives you movement speed and allows you to run unaffected, unimpeded through enemies for the duration. So this gives you basically 5 seconds of the same thing you got from the Iron Skin rune before. Eternal Hope, empowering the law, also increases everybody's maximum life by 10%. So this is only a 5 second. This is all only effective the active ability. So it just gives everyone temporary life for 5 seconds. Empowering the law also has a 5% chance to make nearby enemies drop health globes, just empowering the whole healing thing a little bit more. You have to be killing the enemies while it's active, so enemies have to actually be dying during this time. Fate's Reward, empowering the law will also heal you and your allies every point of wrath that you spend. So if you're a big wrath spender, you can actually do a ton of healing with this. If you have a high wrath pool and you have high wrath regeneration and high wrath spending, this can be an extremely good for healing nearby allies. And this one, this is my favorite one, Laws of Hope Stop Time. Empowering the law causes all health loss and regeneration to pause. Basically, you cannot lose health, you cannot regenerate health. It freezes you and your allies' health in place for 5 seconds. If you have enough cooldown reduction, you can keep this up for a very, very long time. You keep this up very often and basically become unkillable. Is really what you become, is unkillable. And that's all of the abilities. I'm actually going to show you the Wings of Angels one, so you can see sort of how the active works. So as you can see here, I picked that passive on my bar since I can only have one active. As soon as I assign any to my bar, it actually, I don't even have to use it, it automatically replaces it on my buff bar. So as you can see, every time I hit accept, this is actually changing. So let's go over to Laws of Hope, and when you activate it, it does this. It turns into an active effect, and I'm moving really fast. I still have the passive effect, but it's also giving me the active effect on top of it. So that's all of their active abilities, the Crusader. We're already 45 minutes into this video, so I'm going to quickly run through the passives. And now, as I said, you have 4 passive slots, as you didn't before, and you have some additional passives. I will be going over the passives for some of the other classes, going over the new abilities in each of the runes on each of the other classes. So, Fervor, when an enemy dies within 15 yards, you gain 10% attack speed for 3 seconds. Basically gives you a pretty big attack speed steroid, as long as you're constantly mowing through enemies. Heavenly Strength, you can wield a two-handed weapon in your main hand while bearing a shield in your offhand. Your maximum movement speed is reduced by 10%. I can't stand reduced maximum movement speed, but having a two-handed weapon, if you have a really buffed Scorn, level 70 Scorn, you are gonna destroy some stuff with this. So I would like to see some builds work with a two-handed weapon. Vigilant increases life regeneration by a set amount by 1366 and reduces all non-physical damage taken by 5%. Pretty self-explanatory. Fanaticism, your primary skills generate additional 3 wrath, so they generate, 8 wrath per use, so it's just more wrath generation. Insurmountable, when surrounded by 4 or more enemies, your block amount is increased by 30%. Block amount is granted by shields. In case you can figure that one out, you get blocking from shields, so you need a shield. So yeah, it's just basically if you have a lot of enemies, it increases the rate that you will block, so those chance on block builds will work really well with that. Nephilim Majesty increases the duration of Nephilim Glory by 30 seconds. That's those orbs that I was telling you about before. They last like 2 minutes. This increases it by another 30 seconds. Kind of a waste of a passive slot, if you ask me. Indestructible, gain 1% armor for every 3% life missing. This makes you more durable as you lose HP. So that's just what it does. It's self-explanatory. Holy Cause, the amount of holy damage dealt by your weapon is increased by 10%. When you deal holy damage, you heal for 1% of your total life. Anybody going for a holy damage on hit build or using all holy abilities, you can generate a ton of life with this and become extremely, extremely durable. Divine Fortress, your armor is increased by your shield's block chance. So if you have like a 30% block chance, I'm not sure exactly how it converts. Let's see if holding it, it doesn't even say how much. I'm assuming it wouldn't just increase your armor by 30. Maybe increase it by a total of, if you multiply 30% times 100, so it would probably be like 3,000 armor or something like that if you had a 30% block chance. So just guessing. Wrathful gains 50% wrath regeneration for 3 seconds whenever you successfully block. If you're using a block on a chance build, this can make you a wrath generating machine pretty much. Lord Commander, the cooldown of Steed Charge is reduced by 5 seconds and Bombardment by 20 seconds, so you can actually use these abilities far more often. A Steed Charge reduced cooldown makes getting around extremely quick. It also makes the damage dealt by Phalanx increase by 20%. Hold your ground, you can no longer dodge, but your block chance is increased by 50%. Again, chance on block, you probably love this for your build. Long Arm of the Law increases the duration of the active effect of all laws by 5 seconds. The words are difficult. Increase the duration of all active effects of all laws by 5 seconds. So when you use a law like the movement speed law that lets you move through, it makes it for 10 seconds instead of 5 seconds. Iron Maiden gains 123,646 thorn damage. Thorn builds are really, really cool, and I am actually working on one right now that I'll be making a video on later. Renewal, whenever you successfully block, you gain 8,000 life, so very, very durable passive. Gain 70 resistance to all elements for every different colored gem socketed in your gear. If you have 5 different colored gems socketed in your gear, you gain another 70 resistance to all. So it encourages you to, even when you equip gems like EXP gems in your headpiece, or reduces elite damage like diamonds. There's 5 different gems, so if you have them all, you get a ton more resist all. It works very, very well if you can find the right items in the right places to use each gem. Blunt, damage dealt by Justice and Blessed Hammers increased by 20%, so if you want to go for a Hammered In, that is what you're looking for. And Towering Shield, gain 2% block chance every second. This bonus is reset 1 second after you successfully block an attack. Basically, it's just like Indestructible, but it's more a block chance. It's more like a Sharpshooter, but it's with block chance. So if you have a block on chance build and you're not being fought by anything, this is a really good passive if you don't have a high block chance yet. And that is all of the Crusader's abilities. I know it took me almost an hour to get through them all, but I really wanted to show them all off in one compiled video. If you enjoyed this video, please like, favorite, subscribe, and share for more Diablo 3 videos, builds, guides, walkthroughs. All that stuff is incoming. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter if you have any questions about Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls, and the beta. I'm going to be doing extensive coverage on all the classes, all the changes, everything, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And also follow me on Twitch. I do stream Diablo 3 as well as some other games, Final Fantasy 14, Diablo 3, and I'm going to be streaming a lot of things coming up in the future. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.